Now, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to Hockey Stick Talk Nation with my guest, Seth from Locked On Wild. Thanks for coming, Seth. We appreciate it. I appreciate it. Should be a fun show tonight. I know one of my guests or follows here can't make it tonight, and that's a shame. But she's going to watch on the replay. But she sent in some questions for me to ask to you, so that'll be exciting.
Excellent. I am very excited to be here. Like I was telling you before we started up, I don't get the chance to be a guest a lot of the time. Being somebody that hosts a daily show, I don't get the opportunity to sit in the guest's chair as much, and I enjoy it every time. So when you reached out and we're looking to get some Minnesota Wild talk on the show, happy to do it.
Awesome. I appreciate it. I was like, I'm just going to reach out because I listen to the show like constantly every time you drop a new one. And I was like, oh, I'll just reach out. Worst thing happens says no or yes. And luckily you said yes. So this is great. Um, so right now we just got 3 in the chat, but we'll shout out everyone here. Shout out to Dirk Remington and Zach's Collections. Thanks, guys, for coming in. I know the chat will start rolling here in a little bit. Chat, feel free to ask questions. Zach will answer anything hockey related or whatever. But so I guess we'll just dive right in, Zach. So what made you start your journey on Minnesota Wild, I guess?
Great question, because I'm going to shock some people here. I never played hockey at any point in my life, ever. So how's that for a wild story? Somebody who has never played the sport, all of a sudden now hosting a hockey podcast and talking about like breaking the game down on a daily basis. I have, for probably the last about decade or so, been involved in either sports radio or other types of content from a sports perspective. So that is the thing that I kind of have applied to covering an NHL team, because you learn the ways to like analyze what's going on and to break down what's happening. But before Locked On Wild, I hosted a couple of different podcasts. One that I tried to turn into kind of a 1 hour like sports radio show. And then from there, I moved into more of a hockey centric podcast, but I had somebody as a co-host who was familiar with the game. And it was more so me just asking questions and trying to get the answers to stuff, but not really interjecting anything on my own. And one day, one of the other Locked On hosts, Locked On Twins, reached out and said that the network was looking for somebody to host Locked On Wild daily show. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, oh my God, how would I be able to come up with content on a daily basis covering a sport I never played? But I talked to some friends and they said, you should go for it. They said you should try it and see if it's something that you're capable of doing. So I did. I started back in 2021, like right during the middle of the season, and it was hit the ground running from there. And I got to say, it's funny to me in kind of just an ironic way that of all the different times I've tried to do something like this was the one that has gotten me the furthest. Like, this is the one that has opened the doors for credentials, for other opportunities, and plenty more of that I hope will happen here within this next season. But it's ironic to me that the one that I had really I barely watched hockey before like the resumption of the season during the pandemic, when they were all in the bubble. I just sat and watched the day that it came back from 11 a.m. to I think 11 p.m. Just sat and watched every game and was just floored. I'm like, I could get behind this. I could get behind the sport of hockey, because it's constant back and forth action. There's heavy hits, amazing plays, amazing saves by goalies, amazing goals scored by opposing players, but there's so much strategy involved that it was hard to turn away from it. And so started at Locked On, and looking back, I think the big lesson to learn here is that you can be unsure about how something is going to turn out, but a lot of times if you take the leap, it's a decision that you make that you end up being really happy with. And that's how we got to here today, is just taking a leap and going with it. Because there's still stuff that I'm learning as I host the show, but the thing that translates from sport to sport is the ability to just talk about what you're seeing. That's one of the key, I think, pieces that makes Locked On Wild great, is that I just call it how it is. If there's something going on, if the team's struggling, I'm going to figure out why. If the team's doing well, we're going to pat them on the back. And I think people just appreciate that honesty and appreciate that realness of stuff doesn't always go according to plan. What are we doing about it? That's the big key, is what are we doing about it when things don't go right? And what are we doing to, try to go from bad to good? Like, that's all the little pieces that come together to make Locked On Wild as fun and as good of a show as it is, because it's somebody who never played that is bringing his perspective to the sport. And I think that kind of stuff is really important.
Definitely. I know I watch it faithfully and listen to it in my car, actually, while driving to work. And I just love the enthusiasm that you bring to it. Like, even as you say, you don't play, but you can tell in your voice you have the enthusiasm of as if you did play, kind of. So that's what I like listening to it. And I like the guests and your breakdowns of everything. It's all, I just love the podcast as it is. Like, I just have fun listening to it. It's like I'm there and we're sitting around a table and we're just chatting back and forth type deal, which is great.
And that is another key piece of the puzzle, because you can find any you can find Minnesota Wild content anywhere, but are you finding a show that's making you feel like you're part of it? That's the key. Like I've always said, if I'm remembered as when I leave, whenever that may be, I don't have any plans to leave Locked On anytime soon. But whenever I do, I want to be known as the guy that prioritized the vibe. Because if you create a fun vibe and an energetic vibe for a show, you're going to pull people into that and make them excited to tune in and to listen. And this is something that I just, the moment I started, it's like, let's just have fun with this and make this an enjoyable listen, because the energy needs to be there whether the team is really good or whether the team is really bad. I've had some, I vividly remember after the Wild lost 8-3 to the Dallas Stars, and I think they gave up 7 special teams goals in that game, and I thought I was going to get kicked out of the press box because I was irate after the game, like just intensely angry about what was going on. But that's something that sticks with people, is that energy, that passion. And even during the dog days of summer, there's not a lot going on. And bringing that energy and just having fun with it is the way that you keep people tuning in on a daily basis. And so vibes all the time. Every episode, we bring some vibes, and we're just having the time of our lives with it.
I love it. Like, even on the YouTube channel that you have your lives there that you do, and the chat interaction's great. Some of the hosts, like I think his name's Denny.
Yep.
He was great there the other night. Like, he's very knowledgeable, and he had that guest on too, which is great.
Yeah, it's all about finding people that have interesting stories to tell. And listener engagement is a huge piece of the puzzle because, like I talked about before, is if you create a show that people feel like they're part of, they're going to come back. They're going to prioritize you over everybody else, and they're going to keep coming back. And so just adding those little bits, like, for our post games, I love to just sit and go through questions and comments after a game. People are like, you're live after watching a 3-hour game. You're live for like 90 minutes after the game's done. Like, don't you get burned out? And I'm like, no, because I love to hear people's perspectives about what they feel with this team, because people look at different things. I've had more times than I can count, a listener will point something out during a game that I didn't even see, and will say, like, I've noticed this with this player for the last like 5 or 6 games. And then you do a little research on it, you do a little background, and it turns out you got a full episode on why a guy has been struggling over the last 5 to 6 games. Different perspectives all coming together just create this perfect line of content. And that's why I think the bar's been set pretty high with what Locked On Wilds has been able to do on my watch. But I think it's because you have all those elements coming together, and when they all do, and you're able to create all of that live episodes talking about different things, big picture stuff, you can bring it all together in one spot. People really enjoy that.
And I know, just want to shout out to Jay's Mix for coming in. Thanks, Alex. Appreciate you. And I know, too, the rants are fun, too. Even going on the rants, people enjoy that stuff because it shows the fan side of you, too. Like, you got to have the rants here once in a while. You got to go off, and because people relate to that, too. So if they see you doing that, they know, okay, I'm not the only one that this team really drives me nuts.
Yeah, and it's a fun. It's become kind of a fun bit too. Like, if I really get going, people in the comment section, the loyal listeners, the ones that have been with us from the beginning, they really get a kick out of that. And you can even, like, some of them can even tell when the episode gets going, like, there's a rant coming tonight. But the funniest part about it is I try to be more of a glass half full, but sometimes you deviate to the other side of the coin. And so there are some listeners on the show that are eternally more positive than I am at some points. Cause we all, and I'm sure we'll talk about this as the show goes on, there's some big decisions coming up with this team over the next couple of years. And that has led to some really fun moments too, being able to essentially have like a debate live on an episode with somebody who's bringing a different viewpoint, and they say their piece, I counter it, they counter that. And you have just these conversations that you don't get a chance to have otherwise, because you may set up for, well, I'm going to have somebody who is still a huge fan of the direction this team is going in to come on and talk. Some of that gets kind of forced. If it's organic and you don't expect it, those lead to the best conversations. And so, I pride myself in being ready to roll with literally anything that has happened. I had one live post game that got taken over by a bunch of Winnipeg Jets fans because I took exception to what Logan Stanley did to Kirill Kaprizov during that particular game. And so I may have said a couple of things that Jets fans got wind of, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, you got 40, 50 Jets fans in your live stream, and you're trying to sift through them to get to actual Minnesota Wild-based questions. Like, the water may not always be smooth. It gets choppy sometimes, but that's why you got to have a good captain.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And you'll still probably win a cup before the Leafs do, so it doesn't really matter. But, sorry, Alex. You had to get that shot in there.
It's funny too because you look at both teams, and the Wild are on a run of first round postseason futility, similar to maybe not as bad as the one that the Leafs have been on, because it seems like every time the Leafs get into a first round series, they're heavy favorites. But much like the Minnesota Wild, they've had trouble sealing the deal and moving on to round two. A lot of times it just comes down to what happens in the midst of that series, and you may have a team that's better suited to beat your opponent once. You got to beat them 4 times, and whichever team makes the key adjustments first is the one that comes away with the series win. And the Wild have been on the wrong end of that 2 straight years to the St. Louis Blues and the Dallas Stars. They lost those games those series in essentially identical ways because there weren't adjustments made to try to stay on top.
Definitely. So I guess I'll dive into my first question from Julie. So, do you think any Wild rookies will have an impact this year?
I sure hope so, because I'm of the belief that this Minnesota Wild team can kind of control their own destiny this year. It's going to be tough to make the postseason because you've got Dallas, you've got Colorado, you've got Winnipeg, you got Nashville. That's 4 teams right there that should be in the postseason mix. Edmonton's not going anywhere. They're going to still be a heavy favorite in the postseason. Vancouver is really good themselves.
Yeah.
So they're probably going to be in the postseason. So that's 6 teams of the 8 right there. And that leaves you, don't forget about, the Los Angeles Kings. They're in a make or break season this year. Feels like they have to make the postseason. Otherwise, they're going to have to take some real hard looks at that roster. And when I say that, I mean it's going to be another GM doing it, because if Los Angeles doesn't make the postseason this year, there's no way Rob Blake stays. No chance. And so then you've got them. You've got the Vegas Golden Knights. You've got, the Seattle Kraken, I think, are a team that is really hoping that a new coach can get them back to where they were. And that's before you even get to the Minnesota Wilds. Like, I've had long, hard discussions and, have been thinking about this pretty much since the season ended. It's hard to say that the Wilds are better than any of those teams. And that's 8 right there.
Yeah.
It feels like a roster that is obviously limited with the Parise and Suter cap hits. They're limited in what they can do. But they're also relying on a bunch of veteran guys to bounce back from some pretty inconsistent seasons last year. The Wilds just got torched on the penalty kill pretty much the whole season. I'm sure we'll talk about that more in depth. But penalty kill wasn't good. Goaltending was very inconsistent. And, you had guys like Freddie Gaudreau, like Marcus Johansson take major steps back. And Bill Guerin is banking on those guys getting back to form. But what I would like to see, you've got guys in Liam Ogren. You've got Marat Huznadinov. You've got Riley Heidt, who I think can offer you more and I think have a chance to exceed their expectations than guys like Freddie Gaudreau and Marcus Johansson do. I feel like those guys, they're kind of what they are at this point. It feels like a rookie can exceed that production maybe by a lot. And so I would love to see Liam Ogren get a chance on the second line this year. I think he's ready for it. And he has an intriguing kind of a power forward type build that could work really well with Marco Rossi and Matt Zuccarello. Kind of an intermediate to Rossi likes to go to the net. Zuccarello loves to pass. I feel like that could be an interesting dynamic to put a line together. But the wild card here is Riley Heidt. He has elusiveness that, I was talking with Denny about this on one of the Sunday live streams within the last, that was probably 3 or 4 weeks ago at this point. He has the elusiveness that I think can make him an impact NHL guy right now, and he's only 18 or 19 years old. If he gets an opportunity, then all of a sudden this team's got 2 scoring lines. They've got Kirill Kaprizov, Matt Boldy, and Joel Eriksson Ek. If they stick with that as their top line, that's one of the best lines in the NHL. If you can get a second line that can give you 75, 80% of that production, all of a sudden you are a problem. Because defensively, you're going to get Jared Spurgeon back, hopefully this year, which is going to put everybody back into their normal positions. If you get better goaltending this year than you had last year, all of a sudden, that sounds like a team that might be able to leap over one of those 8 to get to the postseason. But those opportunities have to be earned, obviously. And if those players do earn those opportunities, it feels like you maybe have to make a roster move or 2 to fit them in. So that's the big question for me going into the season is, are we going to see some of those young players get an opportunity to try to give this team some life that they need? Or is it going to be mostly the same bunch and just hoping that guys aren't as inconsistent as they were last year and that will be enough to get you over the top?
Awesome. I just want to give a quick shout out here to Maiden's Laurel Wax, Incarnito Sports, Tim, Aaron, Southern Fried. Thanks, guys, for all coming. We appreciate you. Yeah, that's great. I always keep hearing you talk about the first name there. Every time on your podcast, you're always talking about that first one. And it seems like he's going to be really good if he could get the shot. So I'm excited to see what he could do.
Yeah, he's built like a truck. Liam Ogren is, and had a chance to see him at development camp. And for me, when I'm evaluating players and like, do they have what it takes to be NHL guys? There's obviously all the skill involved and the numbers that you put up at particular levels. But there's something for me about just looking the part, like just looking like somebody that if you're with a bunch of prospects, you stand out above them. And it's like, well, this guy clearly is better than these guys. Ogren has that. He stood out every time he did anything during Wild development camp. And I feel like he probably is going to do the same thing in Iowa because it's going to be a lot of those same players. And so for me, that means, okay, let's give him his opportunity at the NHL level and see what he can do, because it is not a high bar for that second line wing spot that the Wild had this past season. Marcus Johansson filled it for most of the year. He had, I think, if you take away power play and goals against former team, like his former teams, I think he had 3 goals that did not come against one of his former teams or on the power play in that second line spot. That's not going to cut it. Yeah. And so the bar that I have kind of set for a player to be successful is, let's say Ogren comes in and he can get you 200 shots from that second line wing spot. If he shoots 10%, that's 20 goals right there. 10% that's not crazy. That's not a high bar to attain. And so it feels like if you give one of those young players the opportunity to take that spot, it feels like they can run with it, which is why I am kind of starting to put my bold predictions together for the season. I think Liam Ogren gets to that 20-goal plateau.
Yeah, I mean, a good balance. Like, I'm a Rangers fan, so the Rangers have a good balance of veterans and young pieces that really mix well together. And I think each team really needs that going forward because it drives the veterans a little bit to do that much more.
Well, and it's a situation where I just would like to see some guys with more skill in those top 6 roles. Like, obviously, Kirill, Joel Eriksson-Ek, Matt Boldy, and Marco Rossi, they're not going anywhere in that top 6. I don't think Matt Zuccarello is until maybe next season, because Danila Yurov is going to factor into the equation next year. He'll be in one of those spots after his season in the KHL is done. So that's 5. The question then becomes who's going to take over that 6th spot. And it could be Ogren. It could be Riley Height. Like, they have options. It's just a matter of giving those guys opportunities to kind of see where they slot in. Because then you don't have to have a guy like Marcus Foligno play above a third line. You can throw Ryan Hartman, a guy who he's played first line, he's played second line, he's played all over the lineup. You can throw him in a third line role and take some of the pressure off of him, while also knowing that you can maybe get a guy on your third line that gives you 15 or 20 goals. Yeah. And that's where you start to gain ground on those teams in front of you in the standings. Because, Wyatt Johnston for Dallas, 30 goals, the only player on the Stars that got to the 30-goal plateau this past season. He's your third-line center. That makes me sick, makes me ill that Dallas has that much depth in their lineup. But those are the kinds of things when the Wild start to get some of those positions filled, then you slot everybody lower in the lineup where they are a better fit, and then you can start to take a run at some of those other teams.
Shout out to Sensei Domino and Chris. Thanks for coming, guys. So my next question from Julie is, what are they doing with Jesper Wallstedt?
Well, this is an interesting one because if you would have asked me at the end of the season, I did not see this playing out the way that it has. So Marc-Andre Fleury, after the year was winding down, and he re-upped for a 1-year deal to stay, with the caveat being that this is it. This is his final go-around in the NHL. Leads me to believe that he is not going to be going anywhere. If the Wild fall out of it at the trade deadline, he's going to stick with the team until the end of the season regardless. So he's taking up, 30-ish starts for the Wild this season. What we all thought was going to happen was Philip Gustafsson getting traded. There was a lot of steam on that during the season last year and through the offseason. And whether it be, there are a couple of different things that could have happened. Either A, this is probably most likely, Bill Guerin didn't get a return that he was looking for, and so he opted not to panic and opted to just hang on to Gus. Or number 2, the Wilds have maybe seen some improvement this offseason in the areas that they wanted Gustafsson to work on, which was mostly conditioning. He looked great in the World Championships. He looked fantastic in the World Championships. And so I'm kind of wondering if that was the point at which the Minnesota Wild said this would be a mistake to move on from Gustafsson, because at the end of the day, he's like 26. He had 2 years ago, he was a top 3 goalie in the NHL. He just didn't have enough starts to qualify for the awards. This past season, inconsistent. But as I kind of said throughout the year, the league got a look at what he does, and now he has to try to counter that. Like, they got a bunch of film on him throughout the course of the season. And now it's on Philip Gustafsson to adjust and try to take care of some of those tendencies so that he can get back to that previous level. He may not be as good as he was 2 years ago. He's better than what he was this past year. And so if he can just be more consistent, then all of a sudden, after the season is done, you can go with Gus as your 1A and bring up Jesper and ease him into full-time NHL life. And so I think the plan at this point is Fleury and Gus is your NHL combo. I've heard some rumors or some suggestions from various people that the Wild are going to carry 3 goalies the whole season. I don't think that's the case. But what is going to happen if Fleury or Gustafsson get injured this year? Jesper is 100% the guy that's going to fill that spot. And honestly, if the Wild have some long road trips, it wouldn't surprise me if they carry a third goalie for those 2. So while Jesper won't be on the NHL roster full-time this year, we're going to see plenty of him. And then next season, it's going to be Jesper and it's going to be Gustafsson that'll be leading that goalie tandem. And I think that was the right choice for the Wild to make, even if it means that we don't get to see Jesper as much as we would like this year.
Yeah. Do you think maybe he'll play a couple games?
I think so. I think, it happened last year that both Philip Gustafsson and Marc-Andre Fleury got hurt. And I think in both cases, they missed about a week. Now, the Wild didn't have a ton of cap space to be able to make moves. This year, that's not going to be as much of a problem. So I think Jesper will, if anybody is forced to miss starts, he's going to get those starts for sure. And depending on what happens, maybe Guerin looks at trading Philip Gustafsson at the trade deadline. I hope not, because again, if you do that and Marc-Andre Fleury retires after this season is done, then it's just Jesper Wallstedt next year. And it feels like that's a little too early to throw a rookie in.
Yeah.
And just say, go get him, kid. As many starts as you can handle, that's what you're going to get. So I think when they got to look at him in the World Championships, I think the tune shifted for the Minnesota Wild's front office, that they said, yeah, we maybe should think about this. And, same thing for Marco Rossi too. Like, there was some trade chatter around him at the beginning of the offseason, but that quieted down substantially too. So
we got a question here. How long do the Wild still have to pay Suter and Friese?
Forever. I will celebrate the day that these buyouts are done, but the key number here for the Minnesota Wild is that this is the final season in which they have to pay both Parise and Suter $7.3 million apiece. After this year, they pay them $833,000 apiece for the next 3 seasons. So they're done paying Parise and Suter after the 2027-2028 season. But the big bill, the big credit card is paid off after this season is done. And I can't wait. I can't wait for that, because I've been talking about that for the last probably 2 years. The number has gone up to this 7 million mark. So I feel like I've been talking about that for like 2 straight seasons. But the other thing that's interesting too, both players, well, not Ryan Suter, but almost, Zach Parise retired before the original deal was done. So that means that the Wild would have been hit with cap recapture. And I believe the penalty for that would have been greater by itself than what they're paying for both buyouts.
Yes.
So thank you to Gary Bettman for putting those provisions in after the contracts were already signed. I'm not bitter about that. Yes, I am. But it's one more year of this, and we can finally breathe. The bill is finally paid, and I never have to talk about it again.
Thanks. It's all about hockey for the question. Appreciate it. So the last question that Julie has, and I don't know if we'll be able to answer it, but she's a card girl. So why doesn't Krill sign anymore? And do you think he will anytime soon?
That is a good question. I'm not 100% sure if that's more of like a, if that's more on the team for maybe going away from those types of things, or if that's on a player by player basis. It could be just that as the season wore on and things like, especially early on in the season, it went south so early that, it could have just been that players focused more on trying to get the team back on track. I can't speak to that, but I would imagine, I don't think there's anything like behind it, but I would just imagine that it could have been any number of things that that led to that. But that is a great question, but unfortunately that is a little bit out of my area of expertise.
All right, so I guess the next one is, how do you see the Wild's penalty kill begin this year?
Well, the Wild penalty kill, I feel confident saying this, it can't be any worse than it was. The overall number for the Wild this past season, 74.5%. And before Dean Evison was fired, I want to say it was in the 60s. And I'm not talking about like 69, 68%. I think it was at about 61% before Dean Evison got let go. And just so that I can make sure that the math is correct, I am going to look that up. And so I get to pull out of my bag of tricks, something that I do at Locked On Wild quite frequently, is just talking my way through something while I look for the number I'm looking for. The Minnesota Wild were, with Dean Evison, at 66.7% on the penalty kill. When John Hines took over, I think they finished the season under John Hines at about 78%, which still isn't great, but it is a little bit of an improvement. Now, why was the penalty kill as bad as it was? Number one, Jared Spurgeon missed pretty much the entire season. He is just a natural on the penalty kill. And so that's a tough player to replace. And so that's one factor. That's one factor that leads to it being as bad as it was. Number 2 years ago, both Philip Gustafson and Marc-Andre Fleury were at about a 90% save percentage on the penalty kill. So that can help too. If your goalie makes all the saves on the penalty kill, then you obviously don't give up as many power play goals.
Yeah.
This year they were in about the 70s. So there was a huge drop in save percentage by both goalies. But the other thing that I think is the biggest issue with the penalty kill for this Minnesota Wild team is the usage. The Wild were the third most penalized team in the league this past season with 938 penalty minutes. If they can cut that number down, I think the penalty kill will be better. And, teams take penalties for roughing, for fighting, for stuff like that. And those don't really bother me. But I do see Wild players get slashing, tripping, hooking, holding, interference.
The lazy penalties is what I call them.
Thank you. Exactly. Some of those like reactionary penalties. I got beat on this play. And so rather than just live to fight another play, they try to get it back all at once. A player goes by a defenseman heading towards the goal, and all of a sudden you grab them to try to keep them from heading towards the net. Well, now you put the penalty kill on the ice, and look, like power plays are getting better and better, it seems, in the NHL. And so some of it is just that the opponents' power plays are insanely good. But I think the big issue over like a scheme thing or a personnel thing, I think it just comes down to it's being used too much. And if the Wilds can, the team that was least penalized this past season was the Dallas Stars at 554 minutes. You're not gonna go from 900 to 500 in one season.
Yeah.
But if you can, even if you could get to where, like the Philadelphia Flyers, 830 penalty minutes, and that would have put them sixth most. But their penalty kill was 83.4%, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
And so if you can cut down some of those penalty minutes, then I think you can start to put up better numbers with that unit.
No, definitely. I think too, from a coach's perspective, is I'd rather let that player go one-on-one with the goalie, because my goalie I know has got a 90% chance of saving that, instead of me grabbing him or hooking him, and then there goes my percentage.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. Like, it's going to happen. You turn the puck over, a guy gets a better edge and is able to skate past you. Stuff like that happens. My big thing, and this will be interesting as we get the younger players on this roster to see if they take this to heart, is just my big thing is just don't make it worse. Like, trust your teammates to be able to pick you up and to be able to overcompensate for a turnover or a bad pass or just a bad angle. Like, that stuff happens to everybody. But just don't turn it into a bigger problem by trying to do something you should.
I just want to give 2-3 shouts here. CCB, Skix G, and Barry. Thanks all for coming. My next thing is, I'm a coach, and I really like the way John Hines coaches. So I really think, from watching him, like how he runs everything, how he did in Nashville and everything, and I think now he has the pieces in the defense with Brock Faber, Spurgeon, and then Beam or Bevan. I can't pronounce his name, but him coming up as well. Like, you got a lot of good defensive prospects, and that's really going to work in his system, because he had Yossi, he had all these good, really, defensemen, and he's a very defensive-minded coach. So I think you're going to see a big change in the way the power play or the penalty kill works this year too. Especially, like you say, we have Jared Spurgeon healthy too.
That is a good point. It's tough for a coach to come in during a season and really fix what's going on. And John Hines talked about that when he took over. Is Bill Guerin said the exact same thing. It's like, we're not going to make drastic changes here. And I think that's part of the reason that John Hines was brought in, was it wasn't working with Dean. And so it was time to make a move. And so Hines plays a similar system. So some of the language might change, but they were able to bring Hines in and keep a lot of the structure of the team intact. Hines has talked about how, in the offseason, they were really going to open the hood and try to find some different things that work for this penalty kill unit, especially. One of the things selfishly that I'm hoping is that they take a look at that 3 high that the Edmonton Oilers ran in the postseason, because I think at one point they were like 47 of 48 on the penalty kill. And I looked at the players they have, and I'm like, well, these guys aren't any better than the ones that are on the penalty kill for the Minnesota Wild. So I'm hoping that they maybe look at something like that. They brought in Jack Capuano as an assistant, and I think he will be one of the guys helping with that penalty kill unit in addition to the defense. But like you said about John Hines, I love the tactician stuff that he brings to the table. Being able to throw different line combinations in during games is something we just didn't see with Dean Evison. Dean was he tended most to just roll his 4 lines at you and hope that somebody was going to be able to exploit a mismatch on like a turnover or something. John Hines regularly puts different players together at different points in the game based off of who's playing the best at that particular point. We saw after successful penalty kills, Kirill Kaprizov, Matt Zuccarello, and Matt Boldy. And like opposing teams, they see that and they're like, what is going on here? So he did some of that. He also, he turned Joel Eriksson Ek into like his go-to center for needing a face-off. But the thing that I think stuck out most for the season is when the Wild were playing the Nashville Predators at the XL Energy Center. They were in desperate need of every single point that they could get. Game went to overtime. And we're sitting there. I remember it vividly because I was up in the press box. Or no, that was one of the games that I was watching at home. And all of a sudden, he pulls Marc-Andre Fleury in overtime.
This is one of my favorite moments because he tries stuff that no one else does. That's why I like John Hines' coaching.
And the key part about that is it was something that we saw happen later in the season. If you give up an empty net goal in overtime, you don't get the point. And so he played that card to try, I think, signal, if anybody had any question about it, that he was all in. He was all in, and he was going to do whatever was necessary to win games to try to get this team into a postseason spot. And they nearly did. If not for a stretch in January where everybody was hurt, and I think they went like 1-7. If you even go 4-4 in that stretch, they're in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And so Hines came in, and I think he just instilled a little bit more of a sense of urgency. Like we heard a lot. The buzzword under Dean Evason was grit. The words that we heard when John Hines took over was play with speed. Now, the Wild have fast players for sure, but they also have some players that are not fast. And so I think it just was turning it into more of a modern style, a modern game. Like you're not playing where you're trying to slow down the opponent, slow them into a crawl, and then just physically wear them down. They're playing a modern style, which means, getting the puck quickly out of your zone and pushing it up the other way to go on the attack. And so a lot of the changes that Hines made were good. The question is just going to come down to something that both he and Bill Guerin said at the end of the season, where they said some of these veteran guys, they should be worried about their jobs coming up with all these prospects. If they perform well during training camp and the preseason, we'll make spots for them. That's one of my biggest questions is, that all sounds good. Like that's stuff that we as fans want to hear. I want to see it. I want to see that taken into account. And if that happens, then I think the Wilds, I think they have a chance to do a little better this year than we think they will.
So now I want to get your thoughts on this. This might be a good one. What do you think of the Brock Faber snub for Rookie of the Year? Because to me, he should have been Rookie of the Year for the minutes he played, which he logged a ton for being a rookie defenseman where Spurgeon was out. They relied heavily on him. And Bedard was hurt for most of it. To me, Brock Faber should have been Rookie of the Year. And I'll always attest to that, and I'll always say he is the Rookie of the Year, even though Bedard won it. It's because its name's Bedard.
Bedard was preordained to win the moment he was drafted, and the moment the coverage turned into hyping him up as the next Wayne Gretzky. But the moment for me that sealed it, that Brock Faber should have won, was when we found out in exit interviews that Faber played the final 2 months of the season with broken ribs, and all the different Wilds reporters and beat writers, we were just beside ourselves on Twitter, because there wasn't one word said about it in those final 2 months. Like, we knew that he was dealing with something, but never once heard that he had an injury as substantial as broken ribs. And so for me, it comes down to points and goals in the Connor Bedard side, or the fact that Brock Faber was fourth in the NHL in minutes. Overall, he nearly had a 50-point season as a defenseman. He was the number one defenseman for the Wild for most of the season. He played on the top power play unit. He played on the top penalty kill unit. He played in overtime. He did everything that the team needed, and everything that the team asked him to do was stuff that they could not afford to have anything less than they got. And so for me, seeing Connor Bedard rack up a minus 38, I think it was. I know he's playing top line minutes and going up against other teams' top lines, but what is he bringing you beyond goals? Faber contributes on both special teams units. He contributes on offense. He contributes on defense. Bedard is just bringing you the goals and the points.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was a no-brainer that it should have been Brock Faber, because the minutes just meant so much more. Chicago was bad regardless.
Yeah.
With Bedard, without Bedard, Chicago was a bad team. They were a more fun team with him in the lineup. But they would have been bad regardless. I think one of the few players that actually kept the Minnesota Wild where they were at, Brock Faber, Kirill Kaprizov, and I'd probably put Joel Eriksson Ek as like your core three that you just could not afford to lose. But of those three guys, the only one that played all 82 games was Brock Faber. So,
and to anybody who doesn't know, playing hockey with a broken rib, that affects everything. Your breathing, the way you skate, and he didn't show any effects of it. You could, like, he didn't even grimace that he was hurt, which is amazing on itself.
and it's funny because like all the analytical people point to like a dip in his numbers over the final 2 months. Pretty easy to explain what caused that, because it lines up almost to the day that he suffered the injury and then his numbers just took a dip. Like it lines up perfectly. And so that explains why all of a sudden he started to have a little bit of a drop of production, because he's playing with broken ribs.
Yeah. Shout out to DK for coming in. Thanks, buddy. I seen you there. So the next question, I guess, is you got a solid blue line for years to come coming up. Like, I've seen a lot of the prospects, and then the ones that you drafted this year are going to be good too. And then with Brock Faber to lead the way as well.
Yeah, like we finally know the succession plan to both Jared Spurgeon and Jonas Brodin, who have been under the radar as some of the best defensemen in the NHL for like 6 years now. They're not getting any younger. Jared Spurgeon is 34 right now. He has 3 more years left on his deal, but his trade protection drops to, I think, a 15-team no trade at this point. Jonas Brodin is 30. He's still got some productive years left, but Father Time, undefeated. He comes for all of us. And so now you've got Brock Faber, who at this point, like I don't know what is off limits for what he's going to be able to do. Maybe 30 goals, but I say that and then he would find a way to do it. He really is one of those sky's the limit type players. And you had the draft board fall to you to where Zeev Buium falls in your lap at 12, and now you get to pair them together for like a decade.
Yeah.
And for all of the work defensively that Brock Faber does, flip that on the offensive side for Buium. Like he just is so polished offensively, and I I just can't believe that we get to see both of them and have that be your, because Zeev is no slouch defensively too.
No.
Like he just is beyond his years on offense. You add the two of them together, they're fluid skaters. That is going to be an amazing combo to watch for this team. But then you've got guys, Jake Middleton will, I think, still be in the mix over the next couple of years, but he'll probably play a little lower in the lineup. And beyond that, you got a bunch of guys in Iowa who could factor into the equation too. Carson Lambos, Kyle Masters, Ryan O'Rourke, Damon Hunt.
Carson Lambos, I'm really intrigued about because I've watched him play in the Western Hockey League on TV, and I'm really intrigued. I would really like to see what he could do in the NHL level because he's a great skater. He gets a wicked shot, and he's smart. Because I find the players that come out of the Western Hockey League for defensemen are they're NHL ready because the Western Hockey League is different from the Q and the OHL. I find they're more gruesome and it's more towards the defensive side.
Yeah, and it was interesting because all of those guys at the Iowa level went through different slumps throughout the course of this past season. And so there are going to be a lot of eyes on them, hoping that they get back on track because any of those guys hit, and all of a sudden then you have a really deep core for this organization. And that's not to say that it's, we got to find a way to get this guy into the lineup. Like if you feel like you're really, really set on defense, you can do what the Colorado Avalanche did and flip Bowen Byram for Casey Middlestat. Like you can use those guys if you feel like there's one that just, that you aren't desperate to keep. You can flip them for a trade and get something that you really need to help this organization. It's going to be really intriguing to see how all these prospects do over the next probably 2 years, because a handful of them will be impact players on the team. Some of them will be trade chips that can help you fill other holes.
I guess we just dive right into my next question there. Who do you think will be traded this year? Do you think Spurgeon will stay, or think he might go, or Brodin?
It's interesting because if you look at this roster right now, I'll just kind of go through what they have. I feel like the plan for Jared Spurgeon this year is just see if he can get through the year healthy. I think that would be something that they probably revisit in the offseason, depending on how this year goes. I still think it's maybe a year to, I'll say 2 years too early to think about Jonas Brodin potentially being moved. The guys on defense that I think stand the best chance of potentially getting moved, I'll throw Zach Bogosian out there because he's a veteran guy, signed to a pretty affordable $1.25 million for the next 2 seasons, but no trade protection.
Yeah.
So he's a guy that you don't necessarily have to ask, but if some playoff team comes knocking for a physical, pretty good skating veteran defenseman, I think Bill Guerin would likely allow that to happen because if you can create one spot on defense, then once the Denver season is done, I firmly believe that Zeev is going to sign his ELC and will be on the Wild roster before the year is done. So if you can free up a spot in the top 7, then you can get him into the lineup down the stretch, give him a chance to see kind of how the NHL works. And then you set him up going into the offseason to really get himself in NHL shape. On offense, I would say the two that are most likely, I'll put Marcus Johansson because he's fine. He's in the final year of his deal. And if the Wild find themselves outside the playoff picture by the trade deadline, he may want to head to a contender because he's probably not coming back anyway.
Yeah.
The other interesting one is Freddie Gaudreau. Had a tough season last year. He was injured. He only scored 5 goals. If he doesn't get back to some level of what he's been over the last couple of seasons, this may be where Bill Guerin comes in and tries to pull off one of his standard hockey trades. It seems like he makes one hockey trade every season. This may be where he says, well, he's not getting it done here. Let's see if we can find somebody that needs a change of scenery to bring in, try to get this contract off our books, because Gaudreau is signed through the 2027-2028 season. It's not a hefty hit, $2.1 million, but it's at this point, it's more just the roster space. Like if you move one of those guys, you can call somebody up to get that spot, and they can potentially give you a little more than these guys are giving you. But other than that, I just don't see a situation in which Bill Guerin moves on from Zuccarello or Foligno or Hartman. I don't see there being anything that can really convince Billy to do that at this point. Now, next year, maybe. But I think at this point, it'll probably be a couple of the like fringe roster guys that get moved. But beyond that, I think everybody else pretty much stays put.
Because I find Zuccarello, when he's with Krill, they have a really good chemistry together. And that line really works well. So you wouldn't want to mess that up, because I mean, Krill could take a dip from that.
Yeah, and it's, at this point, Zuccarello is like, I feel like I say that he struggled quite a bit, but he still had, I think, 69 points, which isn't, it's not terrible. Like nearly a 70 point guy. If he just shoots the puck a little more and gets to maybe, like, if he can be a 20 goal, 65, 70 point guy, you can absolutely live with that.
Yeah.
And I think at this point he wants to retire a Minnesota Wild player. So I think he's going to get the chance to do that. Beyond that, it's really going to be interesting, because Guerin does from time to time do these kind of moves behind the scenes that nobody sees coming. And so maybe he's working on one of those behind the scenes, and we just haven't caught on to it yet. But
I'd still like to see Zuccarello back in the Rangers uniform for a playoff run. That would be ideal to me. So,
well, maybe if things really go off the rails, not this year, but maybe next year, like if the Wild find themselves out of it, and the Rangers, he wants maybe one final curtain call in New York, because I know he would be welcomed back.
Oh yeah, him and Lundqvist are Ranger diehards. Every Ranger fan loves them.
Fan favorites. Selfishly, I love the fact that he helped win the game when the Wild played on the night that Lundqvist's jersey was retired. Figured that he would factor in at some point, and he definitely did.
Because they're best friends on and off the ice, so it was great. And he was there for when Lundqvist's banner went up into Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, so they've got some they've got plenty of history over the years, and it's nice to see that they continue it after Lundqvist is done. But Zuccarello, he's got a little bit left in the tank.
I guess my next one is Marco Rossi. I found him very intriguing when I watched him in the World Juniors. Like, he was one player I was very high on, and when I finally got called up to the NHL, I was super excited. Do you see him fitting in the first line anytime?
That's interesting, because we got a chance to see this combination of Kaprizov, Boldy, and Eriksson Ek basically from February on last year. But there have been some rumblings that John Hines, just in trying to create a little more of an even lineup, there have been some rumblings that he may go back to Kaprizov and Zuccarello paired together. And the guy who got some time with those guys last year was Rossi, and he looked just fine. I cannot say enough good things about Marco Rossi, because he's a great story, overcoming the myocarditis, and a slow start to his NHL career that wasn't necessarily his fault.
Yeah.
He was one of the most consistent players for the Wild last season. He played in all 82 games, and he gave us the quote of the year when he said, all I do is just show up to the arena every day and try to do my best. Like, how can you not root for that?
Yeah.
And he's somebody, too, that there have been reports now, Michael Russo is kind of keyed in on this, that he's coming into Minnesota to kind of get ready for the season in better shape than he was last year. And so you're seeing a guy who's really taking the offseason conditioning seriously. As far as, how can he improve off of a 21-goal, 40-point season? Like, if he adds more muscle to his frame, he's going to be a pest out there. And then all of a sudden, if you can be a physical net front guy, 25 goals.
I kind of compare him, if he can get the build of a Kreider, he's going to be a Kreider. And then if he can get the tips down like Kreider does, he's going to be that absolute, he'll be the next Kreider, really.
And, it'll be key if he is able to get some more functional, like, line mates for that second power play unit. That was a group that struggled mightily for the Minnesota Wild this past season. If they can get a little more consistency there, all of a sudden you go from a guy who scored pretty much exclusively on even strength. Maybe he adds 5 or 6 power play goals to the mix. I really just, like, I feel like we're seeing a player who it could potentially, he's not as tall, but he could potentially have the same sort of a rise that Joel Eriksson Ek has. And that just shows how valuable that type of a player is, which is why I'm glad all that trade conversation got quiet, because 21-year-old guy played all 82 games, 21 goals, is a center. He can play first or second line. Those are hard to come by.
Yeah.
And those are the types of players that you should be trying to keep as you build your roster going forward.
And even harder to come by when they're standing in front of the net, because that takes a beating on you.
Yeah.
Like, you're getting cross-checked in the back. You're getting shot at you. Like, so that's even more of a value, too.
Yeah, he takes a lot of punishment out there, but we saw it at points throughout the season. He is not afraid to dish it back. Like, he doesn't take anything from anybody out there. When Logan Stanley took a shot at Kirill late in the year, I think in the final game against the Winnipeg Jets, Marco Rossi stepped in, and Stanley's like 6'7".
Yeah, he's a big kid.
So there's a little bit of a height difference, but Rossi stepped right in and put a stop to it and was ready to go. If not for a few of his other teammates kind of stepping in to say, this might not be a good idea.
Yeah. And then the last one I got is Matt Boldy. Predictions on Matt Boldy this year.
This is an interesting one, because it's really 2 seasons. The first 19 games of the year, Matt Boldy had 1 goal, and he ended up essentially becoming a point per game player by the end of the season under John Hines. Matt Boldy is right now a fantastic NHL player. He's got a good shot. He is starting, like, his defense is really coming around, which is impressive. The thing that I'd like to see from Boldy is just more consistency. Like, what are you doing to impact the game on the nights when you don't tally a goal or an assist? Like, go try to set somebody up for a goal, or go block a shot, like stuff like that. Like, just make sure that your impact on the game is consistent throughout the course of the season. And I think Joel Eriksson Ek starting to rub off on him a little bit, because he's starting to get a little bit of an edge to his game too. And so I think for Boldy, I'm going to say 30 goals is pretty much a cinch this year, because if he plays any amount of time with Kaprizov and Eriksson Ek, that combination is lethal. If he gets the opportunity to play with those guys, that's going to boost his numbers considerably. And if he's able to just give you 30 goals and 70 points at this point as a 22-year-old, you'll take that every day of the week.
Definitely.
And so those are the benchmarks for me. 30 goals. I'll even go a little higher and say 75 points. If he can put that up this year, I would be elated with that production.
And I know I would be shot down if I didn't ask about Kirill Kaprizov this year. Any predictions on him?
Well, the big thing for Kirill, he's going to be going into the season healthy, which is something that he did not have the opportunity to do this past season. He obviously suffered that rib injury against the Jets, tried to work his way back into the postseason and just was not the same guy. And that affected him at the beginning of the 2023-2024 season. It took him about until the Sweden trip to start to look like the player that he has been in previous years. So now he gets the full offseason to be healthy, and he is going to be determined to shake that off after how the season started here. And it's for the Wild perspective, this is a pivotal season because you can start negotiating with him in the offseason, like to get a new deal done. The Wild want to get a new deal done, but you got to show Kirill that you're making some steps towards being a competitive team. And if he has a year like he had last year for the whole season, you're getting into 50-goal, 110-point territory, and the Wilds could use every one of those goals as they try to get into the playoffs this season.
So, and then I guess my final question is, do you see Joel Eriksson being the number one center for years to come?
I think so. And I've kind of gone back and forth on this because, it'd be great to see Marco Rossi get some of those opportunities. But at this point, Joel Eriksson, he's earned it. He's earned it through his play on the ice, 30-goal scorer for the first time this past season. And so the offense matches what he's able to give you defensively. And so he has earned, in my mind, the opportunity to be that top-line guy. Now, if the Wild do want to try to get Zuccarello going a little more by putting him with Kaprizov, maybe Marco Rossi is your better fit with those guys as a center, which means that you keep Boldy and Eriksson together, and then you're trying to figure out who that other winger is on that line. If that's the case, I'm fine with that. But if we're going to see that Kaprizov, Eriksson, Boldy line combination, it's because Joel Eriksson contributes as much to that as Kirill and Matt Boldy do to that combo. So I think he has earned the opportunity to be the guy. His work ethic is second to none. He's a huge part of the leadership piece with this team too. And it's been fun to see him go from kind of this quiet guy that didn't really have a spot to now being the center that they just want to try to clone 4 times and put throughout the rest of the lineup.
I really think what helped him too is when he played with Foligno and Reeves, that big line that they had for the fourth line there. Kind of gave him a little bit of confidence playing with those guys as well.
That helped him build that defensive acumen that he has. And being just he's a pest too. Opposing players hate playing against him because of the stuff that he does, and he just has a knack for getting under players' skin, which we're starting to see rub off on Boldy and Rossi. And he's one of my favorite players because it seems like his motor's always going. He's always doing something.
I know Draisaitl hates playing against him.
Yeah, Draisaitl said it. There's like a line of players that have said, I can't stand the guy. And I'm like, hey, bring it. I want one of those guys on my team.
Every team wants one of those guys. I guess final question for you, and so I guess we'll wrap it up. Who do you see being the next captain of this team when Spurgeon leaves?
Ooh, that's a good question. Because I feel like it's a little early for Brock Faber to handle that. And so I wonder if the Wilds go one of 2 ways. I think the one that makes the most sense from a leadership standpoint is Joel Eriksson, because he's kind of the lead by example guy. And he just, a lot of the things that he does is, the way that you want every player on the team to handle their business. The other way that I could see, which would be kind of interesting, is Kirill. Like, he's the one that stirs the drink. He is the focal point of the offense. Maybe he wants to be the captain too. That would be an intriguing one for me, but I think the long-term answer, I think, is Brock Faber, hands down. He plays like a 15-year NHL vet right now, and he answers questions, and he is accountable like a 20-year NHL vet right now as a rookie. And that kind of stuff speaks volumes. His teammates, he is revered by his teammates. And those are the kinds of qualities that you need in a leader. And so I'll throw it out there. 5 years down the line, 4 or 5 years down the line, I think he wears the C.
Interesting. So yeah, that was all my questions. Like I said, Seth, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. This was a fun night. Chat was fun. Asking the questions. I know Julie's going to love the questions I asked for her. But yeah, definitely thanks. And for all the chat, I left Seth's LinkedIn bio stuff down in the description. So definitely go check out his show. It's great. I can approve of this because I listen to it every day. And he's just a great guy. I've reached out to a couple other people that you work with in Locked On, and they've said nothing but great things about you as well. I appreciate you taking the time. I know the time difference is a lot, so appreciate you taking the time and sitting down and talking to us about the Wild and everything. I had a blast, and I'm sure the chat had a blast. Hopefully you had a blast.
I very much enjoyed it, and thank you for having me on. Anytime you'd like to have me back on to talk Minnesota Wild or the NHL as well, because I do also host on Tuesdays Locked On NHL. So
Awesome.
Anytime you want to talk Wild or NHL hockey, I'm more than willing to come back.
Awesome. Maybe trade deadline, after trade deadline.
Yeah.
That'll be interesting.
You let me know. I will be there.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming. Thanks to all the chat. Thanks to Seth. Appreciate everyone, and hopefully everyone has a good Friday night. And definitely go check out Seth's Locked On Wild podcast. It's great. You won't be disappointed. I can tell you that right now. And you do the lives on Sundays?
Yes. Sundays, typically at noon. We're getting to the point here in the off season where there just isn't a lot going on. So we may take a week off here and there, but those will be consistent throughout the season. We'll probably move them up just so that we're not having to contend with the NFL. But we will still have those going on Sundays throughout the season. So that should be a lot of fun.
And definitely check out his Sunday show because Denny is hilarious when he's on. I had laughs, and he's very knowledgeable too.
Yes, he is. He's got a lot of hockey knowledge.
He does. But no, definitely thank you for coming. I appreciate it. Definitely I'll be reaching out to you again. Hopefully maybe the Wild will go on a run and we can have you on then and see your thoughts then.
Fingers crossed. But it's going to be a tough run through the West this year. We'll see how it plays out.
Definitely. The West they're set for a while, I'd say.
Loaded Western Conference.
It'll be interesting next year to see with Draisaitl.
Yeah. That could be a big domino if Edmonton just can't get it done.
And if Draisaitl goes, then the other question is McDavid gone?
It could be. That'd be a big couple of losses for Edmonton that would probably be very tough to recover from. But
yeah, definitely.
The thing about the Oilers is they continue to be contenders with those two in the lineup, and they just need to find that way to get over the hump.
Definitely. But no, thanks for coming. Appreciate it. It was fun. I had a blast. Like,
Yeah.
hopefully got to ask you some questions that you never got asked before too. Glad you had fun, and definitely I'm gonna have you back. I'll reach out to you for sure, and I'll always be listening. So, chat, make sure you go check out Seth and Locked On Wild, and everyone have a good night. And hockey will be back soon. Thank God. Later, everybody.